The fluorescent lights hummed softly above gate B-17 as Captain Maya Chen adjusted her pilot's cap and checked her watch. 6:15 a.m. Right on schedule, sound of rolling luggage wheels. Maya's crisp navy uniform was immaculate, 4 gold stripes gleaming on her shoulders, wings pinned perfectly above her name tag. At 34, she'd been flying commercial jets for 8 years, but she still felt a quiet pride every time she walked through the terminal in uniform. Today's flight to Denver would be routine. A quick turnaround, then home to her apartment and her cat, co-pilot. She approached the gate desk where Derek Mitchell, a stocky man in his early 40s, was sorting boarding passes with methodical precision. His airport ID badge swung slightly as he moved, and Maya noticed the way his eyes tracked her approach, not with the casual glance he'd given other passengers but with something sharper, more focused. "Good morning," Maya said, presenting her first-class boarding pass with the same professional courtesy she'd learned in customer service training years ago. Captain Chen, reporting for Flight 447. Derek took the boarding pass but didn't immediately scan it. Instead, he studied it for a long moment, then looked up at Maya with a slight frown. "This is first class." "Yes," Maya replied, keeping her voice level, "that's correct." But something in Derek's expression had already shifted. His eyes moved from her face to her uniform and back again, and Maya felt a familiar tension settle in her stomach. She'd experienced this look before, the one that said her presence didn't match someone's expectations. Derek was still holding her boarding pass. "I'm going to need to see some additional identification," Derek said, his tone taking on an official quality that felt unnecessarily formal. Maya blinked. In all her years of flying, gate agents had never asked pilots for extra ID beyond their boarding passes. Crew members had different procedures. They typically checked in at crew scheduling, not at passenger gates. But she was flying as a passenger today, positioning for tomorrow's assignment. Still, the request felt unusual. "Of course," she said, reaching into her uniform pocket. She handed over her driver's license, maintaining her professional composure even as other passengers began to queue behind her. Sound of conversations and footsteps. Derek examined the license with the same intense scrutiny he'd given her boarding pass. "This says Maya Chen, but..." He paused, looking between the ID and her face. "Are you sure this seat assignment is correct? First class is for passengers who have purchased premium tickets." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm quite sure. I purchased the ticket myself through the airline's employee portal." "Employee portal?" Derek's eyebrows rose. "What kind of employee?" "I'm a pilot with this airline," Maya said simply. "Captain Chen, I'm positioning to Denver for tomorrow's rotation." She watched Derek's face carefully. This should have been the moment when understanding dawned, when he realized she belonged exactly where she was. Instead, his expression remained skeptical. "Pilot," he repeated slowly as if testing the word, "for this airline." "That's correct." Derek glanced at the growing line behind Maya, then back at her. "I'm still going to need to verify this. Company policy, you understand." Maya didn't understand, actually. She'd never seen another crew member subjected to this level of scrutiny at a gate. But she nodded anyway, stepping slightly aside to let Derek continue his verification process while other passengers watched with growing curiosity. Behind Maya, the line was getting restless. Sound of shuffling feet and murmured conversations. A businessman in a rumpled suit checked his watch and sighed audibly. A young mother shifted her toddler from one hip to the other, whispering reassurances that they'd board soon. And near the back of the line, Mrs. Alina Banks leaned on her walking cane and observed the entire interaction with the sharp attention of someone who'd spent 40 years managing middle school classrooms. At the gate desk, Derek was now making phone calls. Maya could hear fragments of his conversation. "Unusual situation. Claims to be a pilot. You need to confirm." Each phrase landed like a small weight in Maya's chest. She understood discrimination wasn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it was exactly this: death by 1,000 small indignities, each one designed to make you question whether you belonged where you stood. "Excuse me," came a voice from behind her. Maya turned to see Sarah Williams, one of the flight attendants for today's crew. Sarah was 28, with kind eyes and the sort of energy that made nervous passengers feel better just by talking to her. "Captain Chen," Sarah's voice carried surprise and something else, concern. "What's happening here?" "Just some verification procedures," Maya replied carefully. She'd learned long ago not to make assumptions about who might be an ally and who might not be. But Sarah was looking at Derek with a puzzled expression. Verification for crew positioning. Derek looked up from his phone. This passenger claims to be a pilot, but I need to confirm her credentials before I can allow her to board first class. Passenger, Sarah's confusion deepened. Derek, that's Captain Chen, she's flying with us to Denver. So you know her, Derek asked. Of course I know her, we've worked together for 3 years. Maya felt a spark of gratitude, but Derek seemed unmoved by Sarah's confirmation. He returned to his phone call, speaking in lower tones now. Sarah caught Maya's eye and gave her a subtle nod, the kind of professional solidarity that said, I see what's happening here and it's not right. In the seating area, Mrs. Banks was no longer pretending not to listen. Derek finally hung up his phone and returned to the gate desk, with an expression that suggested he'd found some justification for his suspicions. I spoke with crew scheduling, he announced, though Maya noticed he didn't make eye contact with her when he said it. They're showing some discrepancies in the system. What kind of discrepancies? Maya asked. Well, Derek said, consulting his computer screen with theatrical precision, it's possible you might be confused about your seat assignment. Economy passengers sometimes think they've purchased first-class tickets when they haven't actually. He let the sentence trail off, but the implication was clear. Maya felt the words hit her like a physical blow. In 8 years of professional flying, no one had ever suggested she was confused about something as basic as reading a boarding pass. I'm not confused, she said quietly, and I'm not an economy passenger. Right, Derek said in a tone that suggested he was humoring her. But just to be safe, why don't we get this all sorted out? I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. Behind Maya, the line had grown longer. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, some curious, some impatient, some beginning to show signs of discomfort as they witnessed something that didn't feel quite right. Sarah was now standing closer to the gate desk, her phone in her hand. Maya noticed she was holding it at an angle that suggested she might be recording, though she was being discreet about it. Derek, Sarah said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of dealing with difficult situations at 30,000 feet, I can personally vouch for Captain Chen's credentials. Can we please move this along? We have a flight to board. But Derek seemed to be settling into his position rather than backing down from it. I appreciate your input, Sarah, but I have to follow proper procedures. This is about maintaining security and ensuring every passenger is in their correct seat. Maya noticed he'd started calling her passenger instead of using her name or title. Mrs. Banks cleared her throat loudly from the seating area. The next few minutes felt like slow motion to Maya, sound of boarding announcement echoing through terminal. She watched as Derek processed other first-class passengers with casual efficiency. A white businessman in an expensive suit handed over his boarding pass and was waved through with barely a glance. A young woman in designer clothes, probably mid-20s, definitely too young to afford first class on her own, received a friendly smile and a have a great flight. An older gentleman with a golf bag got a jovial going somewhere fun, and was through the gate in seconds. Each interaction was a sharp contrast to Maya's ongoing ordeal. Each passenger who boarded without question made the discrimination more obvious, more undeniable. Mrs. Banks wasn't the only one noticing now. Other passengers in the seating area were beginning to murmur among themselves, shooting glances toward the gate desk where Maya still stood, her boarding pass still in Derek's possession. This is ridiculous, someone muttered. What's taking so long? Why is she being treated differently? Maya heard the comments but tried not to react to them. She'd learned that showing emotion in situations like this often made things worse. People expected you to be angry, and when you were, they used your anger as justification for their behavior. But inside, her frustration was building. She had a job to do, a flight to catch, passengers who were depending on her to get them safely to Denver. And instead, she was standing at a gate desk, being subjected to scrutiny that no other passenger had faced, having her professionalism questioned by someone who clearly couldn't imagine that she belonged where she was. Sarah had definitely started recording now. She was being subtle about it, but Maya could tell. Part of her felt grateful for the documentation. Part of her felt humiliated that it was necessary. Derek was making another phone call. I need to speak with a supervisor, Derek was saying into his phone. We have a situation at gate B17. Maya closed her eyes briefly, A situation, that's what she'd become. She thought about her training at the flight academy, the years of studying, the countless hours in simulators, the rigorous testing and recertification. She thought about the passengers who'd thanked her for smooth landings, the crew members who'd told her she was one of the best pilots they'd worked with, the company awards she'd received for safety and professionalism. None of that seemed to matter here. "Ma'am," Derek's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I'm going to need you to step aside while we sort this out. We need to keep the boarding process moving for other passengers." The word "other" felt particularly cutting. Maya stepped to the side, watching as the line continued to move around her. Sarah stayed close, her phone still discreetly recording. In the seating area, Mrs. Banks had stood up and was making her way toward the gate desk with determined steps. "Young man," Mrs. Banks said, her teacher's voice cutting through the ambient noise of the terminal. Sound of conversations quieting. Derek looked up from his phone. "Yes, ma'am." "I've been watching this situation unfold," Mrs. Banks said, gesturing toward Maya, "and I have to say I'm deeply troubled by what I'm seeing." "Ma'am, this is just a routine verification." "Routine?" Mrs. Banks interrupted. "I watched you wave through half a dozen first-class passengers without so much as looking at their identification. But this professional woman in a pilot's uniform, clearly your colleague, has been standing here for 20 minutes being treated like a criminal." Maya felt a surge of gratitude toward this stranger who was willing to speak up. Derek's face flushed slightly. "Ma'am, I'm just following company policy." "What policy is that exactly?" Mrs. Banks asked. "The policy of treating people differently based on what you think they should look like." The gate area had gone quieter now. Other passengers were openly listening to the exchange. Derek looked increasingly uncomfortable, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I'm calling my supervisor to sort this out." That's when Maya heard a familiar voice behind her, sound of confident footsteps. "Maya, there you are. Traffic was a nightmare. I thought I was going to be late." Captain Jim Rodriguez appeared at her elbow, slightly out of breath from hurrying through the terminal. At 55, Jim was a veteran pilot with graying temples and the kind of calm authority that came from 30 years in the cockpit. He'd been Maya's mentor when she first joined the airline, and they'd flown together countless times since. "Jim," Maya said, relief flooding her voice. "Perfect timing." Jim looked around, taking in the scene: Maya standing to the side, Derek on his phone, Sarah recording, Mrs. Banks with her hands on her hips, other passengers watching with interest. "What's going on here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was already forming his own conclusions. "This passenger claims to be a pilot," Derek said, still on his phone but speaking loudly enough for Jim to hear. "I'm waiting for my supervisor to verify her credentials." Jim's expression darkened. "Passenger Derek, that's Captain Chen. She's my co-pilot for the positioning flight today." "You know her?" Derek asked, though he seemed skeptical even of Jim's testimony. "Know her?" Jim's voice rose slightly. "I've been flying with Maya for 3 years. She's one of the best pilots this airline has." Derek looked between Jim and Maya, his confidence wavering for the first time since the interaction began. Two pilots in uniform, both vouching for each other, both clearly belonging to the airline's crew. But instead of admitting his error, Derek seemed to entrench himself further. "Well, anyone can put on a uniform," he said. "I've seen fake credentials before. I'm just being thorough." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jim's face went completely still. In all the years Maya had known him, she'd never seen him look quite like this, not angry exactly, but something colder and more dangerous. "Fake credentials," he repeated slowly. "I'm just saying we can't be too careful," Derek continued, seemingly oblivious to the shift in Jim's demeanor. "These days, anyone can get hold of a uniform. I've seen it before." "You've seen it before," Jim said. "It wasn't a question." Maya watched her colleague process what Derek was saying. Jim had been flying since Maya was in high school. He'd worked his way up from regional airlines to major carriers, had seen every kind of passenger and dealt with every kind of problem. He knew exactly what was happening here. "Derek," Jim said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made flight attendants straighten up and passengers pay attention, "I need you to look at me very carefully. Do you see this uniform? Do you see these stripes? Do you understand what they represent?" Derek nodded, though he looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Good," Jim continued. "Now I need you to look at Captain Chen. Do you see her uniform? Do you see her stripes? Do you understand that they represent the exact same thing as mine? I understand that, but... There is no but, Jim interrupted. There is no difference between my credentials and hers except that she's probably a better pilot than I am. So when you suggest that her uniform might be fake, when you question credentials that are identical to mine, when you treat her like a suspicious passenger instead of the professional colleague she is, you need to understand that what you're doing is not about security or verification or company policy. Derek's face was getting redder. I'm just doing my job. No, Jim said firmly, you're not. By now, the entire gate area was focused on the confrontation. Sound of terminal ambience, conversations stopping. Mrs. Banks had positioned herself where she could see everything clearly. Sarah was still recording, no longer making any effort to be discreet about it. Other passengers had turned in their seats to watch, and some were pulling out their own phones. Derek, perhaps realizing that the situation was spiraling out of his control, made another phone call. Tom, I need you at gate B17 immediately. We have a situation. Maya felt a familiar mixture of exhaustion and frustration. Every step of this process had been about proving she belonged somewhere she clearly belonged. Every moment had required her to justify her presence, her credentials, her right to be treated with basic professional courtesy. But she also felt something else: gratitude for the people who had stepped up. Sarah, who'd documented everything. Jim, who'd used his authority to confront the discrimination directly. Mrs. Banks, who'd spoken up as a witness. Ladies and gentlemen, came an announcement over the gate PA system, we're going to begin boarding flight 447 to Denver momentarily. Please have your boarding passes ready. Derek looked at his computer screen, then at Maya, then at Jim. The cognitive dissonance was written all over his face. He was supposed to be boarding this flight, but he'd spent the last 30 minutes questioning the credentials of one of the people responsible for flying it. My supervisor will be here in a few minutes, he announced to no one in particular. Mrs. Banks shook her head in disgust. This is shameful, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Absolutely shameful. Other passengers were beginning to voice their agreement. Just let her board already. This is ridiculous. She's obviously a pilot. Maya appreciated the support, but she also knew that none of it would matter if Derek's supervisor backed him up. Authority figures had a way of protecting each other, even when one of them was clearly in the wrong. Tom Bradley appeared at the gate desk 5 minutes later, slightly out of breath and clearly annoyed at being called away from whatever he'd been doing. Sound of quick footsteps approaching. At 45, Tom had the harried look of someone who spent his days dealing with problems he'd rather not deal with. His supervisor badge was slightly crooked on his shirt, and Maya could tell he'd hoped this would be a quick conversation that would let him get back to his office. Derek, what's the problem? Tom asked, barely glancing at Maya or Jim. This passenger claims to be a pilot, Derek said, gesturing toward Maya. I've been trying to verify her credentials, but something doesn't feel right about the whole situation. Tom looked at Maya for the first time, taking in her uniform, her stripes, her professional bearing. His expression suggested he was already beginning to understand that this might not be the kind of problem Derek had portrayed. Ma'am, Tom said to Maya, can I see your identification? Maya handed over her boarding pass, driver's license, and after a moment's hesitation, her airline ID badge and FAA pilot's license. Tom examined the documents carefully, then looked up at Maya with an expression that was shifting rapidly from annoyance to horror. Captain Chen, he said slowly, you're supposed to be on flight 447. That's correct, Maya replied. Tom looked at his watch, then at Derek, then back at Maya. Captain Chen, I am so sorry about this. There's been a serious misunderstanding. But Derek wasn't ready to give up. How do I know those credentials are real? He demanded. Anyone can fake an ID. Tom's expression went very still. He looked at Derek with the kind of look supervisors reserved for employees who were about to get themselves fired. Derek, Tom said quietly, Captain Chen is on our crew roster for today. She's been with this airline for 8 years. Her credentials are not only real, they're exemplary. But I still don't think, Derek began. Derek, Tom's voice cut through the protest like a blade. Sound of terminal going quiet. Tom pulled out his tablet and opened the airline's crew scheduling system. He turned the screen so Derek and anyone else who wanted to look could see it clearly. Flight 447, Tom read aloud. Captain James Rodriguez, Captain Maya Chen, flight attendants Sarah Williams, Michael Torres, and Jennifer Kim. He looked up at Maya, then at Jim, then at Sarah, who was still standing nearby. Captain Chen, Tom continued, according to our records, you checked in for crew scheduling 45 minutes ago. You're cleared for this flight, your credentials are verified. You are in fact exactly who you say you are. Tom turned to Derek, and everyone in the gate area could see his expression. Derek, you have been questioning the credentials of one of our own pilots. You have been treating a valued employee like a security threat. You have delayed boarding for an entire flight because you couldn't accept that Captain Chen belongs exactly where she is. Derek's face had gone pale. Around the gate area, passengers were murmuring among themselves, and Maya could hear fragments of conversations. I can't believe this. That poor woman's. How embarrassing. Tom looked around at the watching passengers, many of whom had their phones out, then back at Derek. Derek, you need to step away from this gate immediately. What happened next felt almost anticlimactic after everything that had come before. Derek, his face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been belated recognition of what he'd done, gathered his things from the gate desk without making eye contact with anyone. Tom took over boarding duties, and within minutes the process was moving smoothly. Captain Chen, Tom said quietly, I cannot apologize enough for what just happened. This is not how we treat our crew members, and it's not how we treat our passengers. Maya nodded, accepting the apology while processing everything that had occurred. Part of her felt vindicated. Part of her felt exhausted. Part of her wondered how many other people had been subjected to Derek's assumptions and hadn't had colleagues and passengers willing to speak up. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom announced over the PA system, we're now ready to begin boarding Flight 447 to Denver. First-class passengers, please approach the gate. Maya was the first person in line. As she handed her boarding pass to Tom, she heard something unexpected, applause, sound of sustained clapping. It started with Mrs. Banks, who was clapping her hands slowly and deliberately. Then Sarah joined in. Then other passengers in the gate area began clapping too. Not everyone, some people seemed uncomfortable with the attention, but enough that the sound filled the gate area with something that felt like solidarity. Maya felt tears prick her eyes, though she wasn't entirely sure if they were from gratitude, relief, or residual frustration. Thank you, she said to the gate area in general, though she was looking specifically at Mrs. Banks when she said it. Mrs. Banks nodded and mouthed, You're welcome. As Maya walked down the jet bridge toward the aircraft, she could hear Tom behind her, continuing to board passengers and trying to return some normalcy to the process. Sound of footsteps on jet bridge. Jim caught up with her halfway to the planes. Maya, he said, are you okay? It was the first time anyone had asked her that directly. She considered the question carefully. I think so, she said, I mean I will be. What Derek did was unacceptable, Jim said. And I want you to know that I'm going to file a report about this whole incident. This kind of discrimination has no place at this airline. Maya nodded, grateful for his support, but also aware that one incident report wasn't going to solve the larger problem. Still, it was something. They reached the aircraft, and Maya made her way to the cockpit to begin her pre-flight preparations. Through the small cockpit window, she could see passengers still boarding, including Mrs. Banks, who was making her way slowly down the aisle with her cane. 20 minutes later, as Maya was running through her pre-flight checklist, there was a soft knock on the cockpit door. Captain Chen, it was Sarah. I wanted you to know that I recorded the entire incident at the gate. If you need it for any kind of formal complaint, I have everything documented. Thank you, Maya said, that means more than you know. Also, Sarah continued, Mrs. Banks asked me to give you this. She handed Maya a small piece of paper with a phone number written in careful handwriting. She said she was a teacher for 40 years, and she knows discrimination when she sees it. She said if you ever need a witness or just someone to talk to, you should call her. An hour later, Flight 447 was cruising at 37,000 feet over Colorado. Sound of jet engines humming. Maya was focused on her instruments, but part of her mind was still processing what had happened at the gate. The discrimination had been real and painful, but so had the response to it. People had spoken up. People had refused to pretend they didn't see what was happening. Maya, Jim said from the captain's seat, I've been thinking about what happened back there. Oh yeah. In 30 years of flying, I've never seen a gate agent treat a crew member the way Derek treated you. And I think we both know why that was. Maya nodded. There was no point in pretending Derek's behavior had been random or purely procedural. But I also saw something I don't always see, Jim continued. I saw people refuse to be silent about it. I saw passengers and crew members step up and say, "This isn't right." That gives me hope. Maya thought about Mrs. Banks standing up with her cane, about Sarah recording everything, about the applause when she finally boarded. Yeah, she said, me too. 2 hours later, as Flight 447 began its descent into Denver, Maya made her standard announcement to the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chen from the flight deck. We're beginning our descent into Denver International Airport. She wondered if the passengers recognized her voice, if they remembered the woman who'd been questioned at the gate. Probably some did and some didn't. But for the first time in the entire day, it didn't matter. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was trained to do, surrounded by colleagues and passengers who had proven that dignity and respect could prevail when people chose courage over silence. The landing was perfect.